Welcome to our InfusionPoints webinar series, Did You Know? Today's topic will be describing and having a closer look at the Draft DoD Guidance for reviewing NIST Special Publication 800-171, System Security Plans and Plan of Action and Milestones. Questions may be submitted at any time during the webinar by clicking on the Q&A button within the Zoom control panel and typing in your question. We have allotted time at the end of today's webinar to address these questions. If you've got additional questions after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to us directly via email to schedule a follow-up call. And now our moderator.
Thank you, Rob. My name is Jason Shropshire. I'm Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer here at InfusionPoints. And I want to thank all of our panelists for joining today, and thank all of our attendees for joining as well. I see some folks are joining. So our panelists today are Rob Seat, Chief Cyber Risk Strategist and Senior Vice President at InfusionPoints, and Gary Damer, President and CEO at InfusionPoints. InfusionPoints is a cybersecurity company founded in 2007. Our headquarters is in North Wilkesboro, North Carolina, with offices in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Washington, D.C. We operate a 7,500 square foot cybersecurity operations center, which is located here in North Wilkesboro, North Carolina. InfusionPoints has customers including both commercial and government, and our government customers include local, state, and federal. InfusionPoints offers full lifecycle cybersecurity services that include our build, test, defend methodology. On the build side, we help building compliance, design secure architectures, and provide security engineering services, as well as cloud support services. On the test side, we support our customers with security assessments and penetration testing. On the defense side, we have monitoring and logging services, threat and vulnerability management, and managed security services. All right, today's topic, we'll be discussing the recent DoD guidance that has come out for reviewing NIST Special Publication 800-171 and the POAM. Now, as we know, the issue of protecting CUI, or controlled unclassified information, has been around for quite a while. Back in 2010, there was Executive Order 13556 that really established the government-wide review of managing various forms of CUI. At the time, there were ad hoc, agency-specific policies, procedures, and data classification. On June 15th, 2016, the DoD, GSA, and NASA published a new rule stating that federal government contractors and subcontractors must apply cybersecurity controls to protect sensitive information, leveraging the control framework described in NIST SP 800-171. The deadline to be compliant would be December 31st, 2017, and that's recently passed here at the end of last year. Here at InfusionPoints, we saw a lot of activity in 2017 around DFARS readiness and meeting the requirements around NIST 800-171. And we helped a number of customers implement controls, draft their SSP, and prepare their POAM. Now, during this time, we also started talking about the obvious next steps that we knew were coming, that being those of enforcement. While the original rule did not really mention a specific enforcement mechanism, with the rule being in DFARS, we could all see where this was headed. A significant part of enforcement would be coming during the sourcing and procurement process at the agency level. Sure enough, just a few weeks ago on April 24th, the Department of Defense issued a request for public comment on some new draft guidance. Gary, could you please give us an overview and tell us more about this new development?
Absolutely. Excuse me. Absolutely. The first draft document, the DoD guidance, is the DoD guidance for reviewing system security plans and NIST 800-171 security requirements not yet implemented. The ending is actually the most important piece, is the not yet implemented piece of it. The reviewing, what they're going to do is build a process for reviewing the contractor's SSP and plan of actions and milestones, and then measure the risk of the contractor's information system based on the security requirements that have not yet been implemented. Then prioritization be put on the security requirements that have not yet been implemented as well. The draft guidance document really is not intended to assess the quality of what you have already implemented, but focus on the security requirements you have not implemented. Ultimately, the DoD will assess the risk of these security controls and provide a DoD risk value to score your system security plan and plan of actions and milestones. In addition, what they're really looking for in the comment section of the matrix and methods is they've added some possible implementations for meeting those security requirements, whether it's an IT security configuration, software, or procedure, or policy, or hardware configuration. The second document really is geared right directly to procurement officers and contracting officers. It's assessing the state of the contractor's information system. They're really focused on 4 major areas: assessing that risk presented by the contractor's information system based on the NIST SP 800-171 requirements, and also on the not yet implemented aspect of that. Assessing the officer's implementation of the security requirements in addition to security controls that are imposed by the NIST documentation as well. What they're also looking for is not only in the procurement process, but and after the award process. So part of the contractor's performance. So we're looking at possibly adding these to existing contracts, and the government may monitor the controls with an independent government assessor, sort of like if you're familiar with the FedRAMP process. The contractor, what they're also looking for is a contractor to truly confirm the self-attestation of the compliance piece. So in other words, when you answer that you're compliant with DFARS and you submit a POAM with that, all the items that you have not ultimately implemented, you have some kind of plan and action plan to implement those controls. They're not going to wait the controls that you have implemented already. They're going to allow you to self-attest to that as well. So what they're looking at really is each objective requirement really being included in future RFPs and existing statements of work that are currently out there as well. I think one of the clear things, Jason, that this is really indicating is focus on the DoD is really serious about this, and they really are trying to have a much broader enforcement arm into the security requirements.
Yeah, I mean, so here we are. The DoD has requested public comments by May 31st, which means that enforcement could be coming, this year. The last deadline was at the end of last year. I don't think they're going to wait that long. They definitely seem to be on the fast track here, and it's easy to understand where the concern is coming from. I mean, a recent example, there was a March 29th, 2018 IG report from the Missile Defense Agency, MDA, that's I feel is very relevant here. Rob, can you tell us more about that IG report?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. One of the things that you can always tell is when an IG report comes out, additional eyes and scrutiny are being placed on areas of deficiency. Jason, as you had indicated, the Department of Defense at the end of March came out with their Inspector General report looking at those contractors that support the Missile Defense Agency. 7 specifically were identified, and the walkaway is that they were not consistently implementing security controls and processes to protect the both classified and unclassified information, or what we commonly call the controlled and classified information. Some of the items that were highlighted were inconsistent use of multi-factor authentication, lack of password configuration, lack of a consistent assessment process of information systems, lack of oversight with boundary protection provided by third party, lack of use of restricting removable media. And if you take the 110 controls that are highlighted within the NIST Special Publication 800-171, you see that many of these align one-to-one. One of the things also that the IG report highlighted was that the MDA, as the contracting official or the contracting agency, also has a role in this, and their role is to make sure that either before the contract gets underway and during the performance period of the contract, that the security controls that are highlighted within 800-171 have not only been met, but are being maintained, and where they're not being met, that an appropriate risk decision has been made.
Okay, very good. So, I mean, clearly there's a question of national security here when it comes to these IG findings. So this is obviously a critical issue. So right now we're going to move to some questions for our panelists. And this first question, I'm gonna forward back over to Rob. Why did the DoD focus this guidance on the system security plan and plan of action and milestones?
Great question, Jason, and one that we hear a lot. If you look at all the support documentation that is ultimately referenced and required within the NIST 800-171 process, you have things like incident response plans and configuration management plans. But why system security plan and the plan of action and milestones? We see these as the two cornerstone documents in any solid security assessment process. The system security plan is designed to reflect the status of your infrastructure that's supporting your controlled unclassified information, and should show the status of compliance against each one of the 110 controls, and where there are either being partially met or in some cases not being met, then those are highlighted on the plan of action and milestones. So said another way, if you take these two documents, it does allow the Department of Defense to make some type of a risk determination based on the contractor's ability to process, store, and transmit controlled unclassified information. Gary, what else would you add?
I think I would add one thing. If you remember the third objective that was in the procurement aspects of this, is that agencies can obtain a third-party assessor. And one of the ways that they would assess the work that you've done is by looking at the system security plan and your plan of actions and milestones.
Great point.
Okay, very good. Moving on. So question 2, why is it important that the DoD guidance address NIST 800-171 security requirements not yet implemented?
So I'm also the president of a company that does work in the federal government, so I truly understand the self-attestation piece when you sign your contracts. And you're signing up to do a lot of things when you agree to all those DFARS check boxes, as a lot of us have said in the past. This one right here actually has some true real meaning as well, from the security and the national security for our development of systems for the Department of Defense. The one aspect of this one is you're going to self-attest to many of the requirements that you've implemented, but the ones they're going to focus on is those that are not yet implemented. They're going to want to know why. What critical ones do you have that will pose a larger risk to an organization? So what they'll do is they'll add up the risk score based off of what you don't have implemented up to this point. Some of those totals up to give an overall risk value to your system. Now, they're not coming out and saying that it truly is going to be the deciding factor, but there are some possible go no go scenarios that could play out with contractors as you move forward. Here again, they're focused on the ones that are not implemented and not the quality yet of the SSP, but that could be the next step.
Okay, thanks, Gary. All right, question 3. This one goes to Rob. What are the next steps for DoD contractors based on this guidance?
Great question. In fact, we hear this often as new publications and guidance are being released. So we noted in the beginning of today's series that the guidance currently stands as draft. So comments are being requested, and the comment period ends at the end of this month. We anticipate that potentially becoming official going into the next fiscal year in the October time frame. But what does this really tell us? One is for those contractors that have not provided any forward movement on becoming DFARS compliant, to start looking at the requirements, be proactive. Reach out to organizations for help and support in this particular area. You want to be prepared. Because the guidance, one could say, can be directed at not only the contracting office, but it gives you insight into what would be assessed. Then you can take the assessment ratings that are provided within the draft guidance and do your own self-assessment. It's like the pre-assessment before the official assessment. You want to be able to understand where you are at that point, and then where some of the deficiencies come up. That'll give you an opportunity to have some meaningful conversations with your contracting officer.
And let me focus one thing here as well. So as DoD contractors, the main thing we need to be focused on is developing the system security plan and that plan of actions and milestones. So when they do ask for it, you're ready for it and you can deliver something. Something that Rob and I spoke at a conference in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago. And one of the things we asked, one of the questions we asked is how many people have started, how many people are in the process, and how many were completing. And we were noticing that it was about one third. But after our talk, I think the 1/3 that thought they were done were like, well, maybe we're not, maybe we missed a few things. And that's why it's important to document most of these things in the system security plan. And that's why this guidance is focused on that as well.
I thought the other thing that was noticeable about that kind of particular informal survey was the third was not necessarily unique to the size of the business.
That's correct. Yes.
Because we saw both large companies had not gotten the traction that they had needed at that point in time.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you. We're going to switch gears real quick and address some participant questions. And folks out there who are participants, it's not too late to submit your questions, so please feel free to go ahead and do that if you haven't already. We already have some participant questions here, though. So the first one is, it's a good question because there are so many control frameworks that are out there. This first question is, what is the difference between NIST 853 and NIST 800-171?
I'll take that.
Okay.
So very simply, NIST 800-171 was derived from the special publication NIST 853. And what they did with 800-171 is they pulled out all the inherently government requirements, and they also pulled out all of the requirements for availability. They focused mainly on the confidentiality and integrity aspects. What they really want you to do is be able to keep the information confidential and make sure it doesn't change. So that's where you get your 110 versus the 297. I think that's in 853.
And it's up really to the each individual agency and contracts to deal with the issue of availability.
That's correct.
Via SLAs.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
You still see 853 being referenced within the broader spectrum of DFARS guidance, just for those looking for more prescriptive answers to some of the control questions, and it can give you at least a starting point for trying to figure out heads and tails.
Okay. All right. Second question here. What do you think enforcement will ultimately look like? I mean, this is what everyone's been asking since this rule was issued. You know, what will enforcement look like? What will the penalties look like? How can we plan our business around this? What do you think? What do you think that we're looking at here?
I'll take that. A couple things around enforcement. Ultimately, it could be halt or stoppage of a contract because there's a risk identified. Ultimately, this process is helping to identify, is the infrastructure managed at an acceptable risk to be able to process controlled unclassified information. I see enforcement being rolled out in a couple of areas. One is being able to provide some type of an assessment, and based on the outcome of that assessment, then that's going to put you into some type of a risk ranking, and that will depend on you know, being able to go forward on a contract. I also see assessment being looked at whether you're a prime to the DoD or a sub to a prime, that what the prime is being asked to step up to. I see any subs to that prime also being assessed at the same level. Gary, you may have some.
Let me twist the question
Sure.
just ever so slightly, and not think about it from an enforcement standpoint, but think about it from a differentiation standpoint. If you do meet all these requirements, then you're going to be able to breeze through, or you know, you could be, you know, better than your competitors, and that's kind of the way that I look at it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this dovetails really nicely into this next question. When do you think enforcement is likely to begin or to start happening?
I could dig. Yeah.
Sure.
So the timing of this is end of May for comments. If you think they take, say, 60, 90 days to adjudicate all the comments and then put out a new set of guidance, you'll probably come out sometime, say this fall, and maybe they start to enforce it in the new fiscal year, which the timing would line up to meet that.
Sure. Okay. So here's another question. How will this impact our existing contracts? So I know a lot of folks are anxious about that. They didn't have this requirement when they priced their existing agreements and contracts. So how's this going to impact those folks?
Well, we see a couple of things. One is just because the contract is in the middle of its period of performance, it's not immune to the requirements from a DFARS standpoint. It could potentially hold up the renewal of option years. It may also impact the ability for recompetes, and in some cases, it could potentially mean that work is stopped until some of the deficiencies are addressed to an acceptable level.
And if you remember, that is the third objective inside of assessing the state of the contractor's information system, which is the second document for guidance, which is really assessing implementations of NIST SP 800-171 after award. So what do you do from a contract perspective after award?
And finally here, one last question that came in. In your determination, what is meant by the term adequate security controls?
So we actually see this quite a bit where NIST 800-171 meets a certain level of requirements, but then there are certain caveats within the NARA implementation of the guidance, and they're really focusing on the additional sets of requirements that you may see for higher level security requirements for individual organizations.
One
right.
final thought
Sure.
that I will leave. Although DoD is the ones that's stepping out with this particular guidance, we also get some indication that some of the civil agencies may also be coming out with some higher security requirements that they require on their contractors as well. So we believe on one hand, that this is kind of the tip of things to come.
Right. Okay. Well, very good. Thank you, gentlemen, for your insight. And I think that we're through all of the participant questions today. I want to thank all of our attendees for joining us today, and thank you for participating in InfusionPoints First Did You Know webinar. Please feel free to contact us with any additional questions you have. We're going to put some contact information as we leave up here in a second. For more information about InfusionPoints, our DFARS compliance, our DFARS compliance support services, or any of our other cybersecurity solutions, please visit our website at www.infusionpoints.com.